Hello, and welcome back to our next authority interview. I'm Robert Evans, co founder of Action Air, and I'm very excited to be here with our next guest to learn all about what they're doing in the world, what they're an authority in, how they're transforming people's lives, and to dive deep into the work that they do so that you can understand and connect with them to deepen your transformation in your own lives. So our guest here today is Doyle Banks. Doyle, welcome to our interview here.
Thanks, Robert. Great to be here, and I'm really excited for this opportunity to share.
Well, I'm very excited to talk about the work that you're doing. We've talked a little bit about it so far, and I just kind of love the journey that's gotten you to this point here. And so let's just kind of jump right in and tell us what is it that you do? What is it? What's the message that uh, you bring to people, and who do you work with, and that sort of thing?
Right. So the message is, can we simply love each other? The question, and it's a question that came to me in a sort of a transcendent spiritual experience when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
And so I've been on this long, sometimes circuitous journey in search of answers to that question.
Since
And
you're 8 years old.
since I was 8 years
Well,
old.
that's
Yeah, it was a December evening. My mom was out in the living room. I was in bed. My mom was out in the living room watching some Christmas special. And I'm hearing this beautiful Christmas music. And suddenly just something wells up inside of me. And I could feel it in my marrow. And all of a sudden I'm weeping and I'm whispering to myself, why can't we just love each other? Why can't we just love each
mm,
other? And I fell asleep and kind of went on about my 8-year-old life, right? But that was always burning inside of me at one level or another. And then at 12 years old, I had another experience, a really different experience with my mom, where I was basically begging her to let me enroll in the junior high music and drama program that met after school.
mm-hmm.
And I was sitting on the basement steps and I'm saying to her, Mom, you don't understand. This is so important to me. This is my life, right? And she turns and locks eyes with me with this like cold look in her eye. And with sort of venom in her voice, she says, it's not my job to understand you. It's your job to do what the hell I tell you to do.
Wow.
I was just dumbfounded, gutted. So this was early in the morning. I was waiting to get on the bus to go to school. And all of a sudden, I'm just filled with just anger and rage. So I get on the bus and I find myself making a vow that I'm going to hate her. And from there, it was just this long journey into hell, and finding a lot of answers to that. Why can't we just love each other? Well, here's why, and here's why, and here's why we can't, and here's why I can't. And then in
So you were answering the question,
I was answering the
but
question.
not the direction that you really wanted it to go, I
Yeah,
would imagine, huh?
right, right, exactly. And it was interesting, Robert, because all this time through childhood into early adulthood, I was raised in church, God is love, love one another, et cetera, et cetera. But I couldn't connect the dots. I couldn't figure out, okay, how can this work? There's got to be a way. And then in 93, I'm sitting in my little studio apartment and I read these words that were spoken 2,600 years ago. It was, for hatred can never put an end to hatred, only love can. The tectonic plates of my life shifted. And in that moment, I made a decision, okay, I'm going to take the exit off this highway to hell that I've been on, and I'm going to figure this out. That was 1993. So for the next 15, 20 years, I I just went in a whole other direction, pursuing things like uh, mindfulness meditation, and I studied with some different spiritual teachers. I became a huge fan of Wayne Dyer,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to study with Carolyn Mace,
Mm-hmm.
did her 2-year program with her, and little by little the pieces started coming together. One thing I learned from Dr. Wayne was you can't give away what you don't have, right?
Yeah.
And that was a moment where it's like, oh, if I don't start loving myself, then how can I expect to be able to love, give this love away that I want to give when it's not here?
Yeah. That reminds me of a spiritual principle that I learned a long time ago from another spiritual teacher, Neil Donald Walsh. I don't know if you're familiar with his
Yes.
work. And there's a message in there that has always resonated with me for, a very long time because it's been a while since I've started to be in his world. And that message is be the source. Be the source to others that which you would like to have in your own life.
Right.
And we see a lot of disconnect around the things that we want. It's
Right.
like, it's like treat others as you would like to be treated. Do we really see a lot of that in the world nowadays? No, not
No.
at all. Like the very, very opposite of that. And so what Wayne Dyer and Neil and is saying is such truth.
Hmm.
There's such power to that.
Yeah.
A real quick question about that time of your life. When you did make that shift, did that eventually translate over to your mother?
Eventually, it
Mm-hmm.
took a, a bit. Um, a sad thing going back to that morning in 1965 when I was 12
Mm-hmm.
on the basement steps, and that we had that disconnect. It was like standing on an iceberg that split in two.
Mm-hmm.
And she's over on the other side, and I'm over here, and there's nothing between us but cold, dark ocean water,
Yeah.
and we're just drifting further and further apart. And neither one of us realized in that moment that we'd never reconnect. So she passed away, um, in, I think around 95, if I remember right, and we never did
Yeah.
get it back together.
Yeah.
I was able to come to a moment of forgiveness, which was huge,
Very, very powerful. Very
very
needed. Yeah.
powerful. Um, and thank goodness, because that freed me up then, because it wasn't just about forgiving her, but it was about forgiving myself
Yeah.
for, you know, holding on to that hatred for so many years, right?
Yeah.
And so on. Yeah, you mentioned disconnection. So my uh, message now around, can we just love each other, is ties into this system that I've put together I call the connection advantage.
Mm.
And what I realized is, when we get disconnected at different points from ourselves and from each other, and this is across the board in any, whatever relationship we're talking about. It could be, I see, it can be from in the bedroom or the boardroom,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we get disconnected, and if we're not conscious about it, it becomes what I call CUD, this consistent unconscious disconnection.
Could. That's a
CUD.
good. It's a good sound for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about as pleasing as it sounds, right? And if we're not paying attention, we tend to stay over toward that state.
Yeah.
But what we need is to be in what I call consistent conscious connection. And that then gives us that bridge to the connection advantage, that bridge that makes it possible for us to love each other. So what I teach now is uh, what I call developing a goodwill mindset. and um, developing mindfulness habits, and then developing empathy skills. And when we put those three together, that helps me and the people I've been able to share this with live in this state of consistent conscious connection,
Hmm.
and love flows when we're in that state.
So when you're in that state, and when you see other people in that state, what do you observe or what do you experience as some of the main benefits
Mm.
of in just kind of daily life?
Yeah, definitely less stress, even though in in life, hard things can be happening, but when we're in that state, it's kind of like what you were saying. It's really about connecting back to source, right? So when we're plugged in, the juice flows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So less stress is certainly one of them. Um, More presence of mind and heart. So one big thing is we actually listen to each other and hear each other. And one of the things I tell people is when you practice this, you have a much better chance of being able to create relationships that are based on understanding, respect, and trust. And when one of the biggest things I hear from people um, is the lack of understanding is such a heartbreak point for so many people.
Yeah. Yes, I feel like also that that comes from people just not being present
Yes.
around each other,
Yeah.
which is they got their head buried in whatever that is going on, or they're buried in their thoughts about the reaction to the world that's around them. And I know
Hmm.
that if you are to be present and you do have that connection, a lot of that just kind of dissolves away.
Right. When I
Yeah.
teach communication skills, and I base that on a model that I learned from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, that's called nonviolent communication or compassionate communication. And one of the first things I teach is sit down and listen to the other person without preparing your answers, right?
Mm.
Or your defenses, or
Mhm.
which is usually what it is,
Yeah, that's
your
usually what it
counter arguments, right? Yeah, but and Marshall and Dr. Rosenberg always said, "Don't put your butt in other people's faces." And,
That's good.
so yeah, it's like you said, just really about being present, about active listening too is really key. In other words, um, if you're telling me something about what's going on in you, then one of the best things I can offer you is to reflect that back. So if you're telling me about, not that you would say this, but what a jerk so and so is, and they did this and they did that, then I might reflect back to you, wow, it sounds like you're really PO'd there. And it sounds like maybe you were wanting some respect or whatever I might guess that you might have been wanting in that moment. And it's amazing when we do that, even if we don't say, if I didn't, I might have guessed you were wanting respect. If it's not that, you'll come back intuitively and automatically tell me what the desire in your heart is. And when that happens, there's this connection that happens that's downright magical.
Mm.
Uh, Especially, I've seen it over and over, like with married couples who've been together for a while and they've been disconnected and can't figure it out. And as soon as they can hear what the desire of each other's heart and reflect that back to one another, it's like the lights get turned on,
Mm.
and the compassion, the care, the love that opens up between them is just amazing.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah, it's
That's
fun.
great.
It's like being a magician almost, or
Uh-huh.
something, or an alchemist.
I like that. I
Right?
like
Yeah.
that. Now, I know that one of the ways that you're wanting to spread this message is through your own mobile app.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that app, and can you tell us about what you're hoping people will have the experience of when they download that app and connect with the messaging that you have in there?
Yeah. So the Connection Advantage app will be an avenue to share with people about how to develop a goodwill mindset, how to practice mindfulness habits, and do the empathy skills, learn those. I will offer a course, or I am offering a course in that will uh, take people through the process of learning those skills and practicing them and developing them. I'll also have content like tips on how to end misunderstandings in
Mm.
relationships. So I have a set of 7 tips. And
So someone's in the middle of a misunderstanding, they can just pull out their phone, open up your app, and get some ideas on how to move through that. Huh?
right,
I love that.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then there will be opportunities for people to do things like journaling,
Mhm.
to track, okay, what am I learning, from these tips, or from if they're in the course, what am I learning and committing to practice today, and how am I, what kind of progress am I making with that? So give them some time for self-reflection.
Self-reflection. That's very, very powerful. Very powerful.
I also have some recorded mindfulness meditations. Uh, they're geared for things like if you're experiencing anxiety, you listen to that one. If you're experiencing anger, listen to that one. Loneliness, etc. Even mindful eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who's the ideal person to download this app? Who should be really looking at this? What would you say?
Um, that's a good question. I know it's kind of broad, but if someone's trying to figure out, if they've hit the point where they realize, okay, I keep getting disconnected and I can't figure out why, that would be the person that, if you're at that point, grab the app.
Any communication, any connection they find challenging, or
Right,
it just feels like
right.
it's hard to just be around people or whatever. That's part of the
Yes,
disconnection, I
that's
take it.
part of
Yeah.
it. Right,
Yeah.
right. And another clue is if you find yourself walking around blaming other people,
Hmm.
and it requires that you have to
So
that
you
you
need to see half of the world's population then, huh? They need to download
yeah,
your
sign
app.
up now. Um,
Well, and the nice thing is your app is available to,
yes,
80% of the world population. So,
right.
please download it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So and it requires being willing to start listening to the conversation in your head. So if you're walking around thinking, if she would just get off my back, or if he would just shut up, or those
Right.
kinds of
All the
things,
external things to
all
you,
the
right? Yeah.
yeah, if your conversation is always pointing the finger out this way, download the app and start listening.
Yeah. Why do you think your message is important now?
Mm. Oh man. Uh, Boy, where do I start? um, Around the world, we're seeing evidence right now that we're disconnected in major ways from one another, and we're disconnected from ourselves in major ways. And there, when I was growing up a long time ago, uh, there seemed to be a basic willingness among people to at least try to listen, you know, regardless of how well we could do it. There was at least the intention to try to sit down and listen to each other. And that seems to have gone out the window somewhere along,
Totally.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And they're not even hiding it.
and not, yes, not being polite about
There's
it
no,
anymore.
it's like not even,
Yeah,
this person's clearly not listening to me and clearly doesn't care. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, the that burning question, why can't we just love each other? Well, it kind of assumes that there's even a desire to love somebody,
Mm.
even if it's just myself, right? And so I think the message is important right now to help people just kind of maybe step back a little bit and say, okay, uh, I'm angry, I'm lonely, uh, I can't seem to find my tribe, find people I belong with, or I'm in this state where my tribe is against everybody else, kind of thing. Sort of step back and just ask ourselves, is that really how I want to live the rest of my life? Or is there something better?
Even if you were to just do that for yourself, right?
Yeah,
Would you agree that love's got to start here first within?
absolutely. I
Yeah,
talked
yeah,
about going to church when I was a kid.
yeah.
Uh, I had a string. They would give you perfect attendance, little pins,
Yeah.
medallion things. I had 10. So there were 10 years that I was in Sunday school every Sunday. Uh, and never once, it was always about love others,
Right.
but I never heard a sermon about as you love yourself and how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, what I heard, and especially, you know, in the way I was brought up, was, oh, you're being self-centered, right?
Yeah. It was a bad thing.
It was a bad thing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Or you're full of yourself, or
Right.
whatever the
Yeah. You're
judgment, the
being
crit.
selfish. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Oh,
Maybe. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that hit a nerve.
Yeah.
So,
Uh,
um, again, when I read that, hatred can never put an end to hatred, only love can, part of what I got was, man, I've really got to start loving myself
mm-hmm.
and figuring out how to do that. And part of it was, again, forgiveness, forgiving myself. Part of it was just rewiring my thinking to think kind thoughts about Doyle, because there was no kind thinking going on in this mind, all those years.
Yeah.
And so as I started doing that, I started noticing one thing that was great was I started noticing that I could laugh at myself
Mm-hmm.
in a good way, not in a mocking or
Self-deprecating. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
but it was just generally like seeing the humor in my humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and I would literally like, and I still do now, like something I'll catch myself doing something, and I'll just bust out laughing,
Mm-hmm.
out loud. I live by
Yeah.
myself, and it's like,
Well, I know the feeling. I crack myself up all the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's been such a refreshing aspect of all this journey, is
Yeah.
to just lighten the hell up and
I like that.
enjoy,
I like that.
enjoy.
Yeah. With this focus on self-love, and you've obviously talked about like the forgiveness process, and and just laughing at yourself and other things. But what would you say is that first place that people can start? What's the one thing that they can do today
Mm.
to start that self-love process, to where it kind of starts to build upon each other until they can really dive deep into that and transform their experience in their relationships? What was that? What's the one particular thing a person can start with?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, so mentioned a couple times developing what I call a goodwill mindset. So in my spiritual practice, we practice something called loving kindness, um, or another translation of the original word from the Pali language way, way back. Was metta,
Mm-hmm.
M-E-T-T-A.
And we're not talking about the other meta, right? Yes. I'm
No,
sure.
no.
Yeah. To be
Yeah,
very clear. Yeah.
yes. So metta, or loving kindness. Another translation of that word is goodwill, which I like that word
Mm-hmm.
a little better. Um, so they what you can start doing right now, in fact, if you want, while you're watching this video, just hit the pause and get bring a picture into your mind of somebody who's really easy for you to love, right? And then just think, what's the most wonderful wish that I could make for this person, right? Form that wish and just imagine sending that from your heart out to theirs. Now, here comes the catchy part. Next step is take that same wish or the attitude of that wish and imagine you sitting in front of you.
Mm.
And you might want to picture a younger version of yourself or could, however you view yourself, and send that same energy, that same love, that same goodwill to yourself. I promise you, I pinky swear promise you, practice that every day for at least 66 days, preferably for the rest of your life. 66 is because there's neuroscience about habit formation
Yeah.
that goes into that number, but preferably for the rest of your life. It will change your life. One of the things that happened to me when I started practicing that, I had a day job in IT and I was traveling like 3 weeks out of every month. I was based there, I lived in Northwest Indiana, and so Chicago O'Hare Airport was my home base airport. So every Sunday afternoon, I'd be walking through a concourse on the way to the gate, and I would just get this little like nudge in my gut. I would look up, and every time somebody would be looking at me right eye to eye, walking toward me, somebody on the way to their gate, and we would just meet eyes and smile at each other
Mm.
and keep going. But I mean, I would, like I said, I'd get this little bump and eye contact. I would look up and they'd be looking right at me. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have to seek anybody out.
Yeah,
It
the
was,
intuition was clear.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I relate that directly to I was creating this energy field, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, attitude of goodwill, you know. And it's kind of like if you've ever seen statues of Saint Francis
Hmm.
of Assisi, and there's the little bird perched on his
Hmm.
finger, right? You know, the legend is that all the animals were drawn to him because there was no reason for them to fear him.
Mm.
He had such love and goodwill in his entire being. And there's legends in all the spiritual traditions of people who developed goodwill at that level.
Hmm.
So start by, for most people, it's easiest to start with sending that to somebody that you love,
Hmm.
and then bring that home to yourself. And then if you want to get fancy with it, practice sending it out in increasingly widening circles.
Or into people that you may have not loved as much, right?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and send it around the world and then always bring it back home to
Nice.
to your own heart.
I love that. I love that. All right, I got one big last question for you.
Oh, okay.
Small one. What impact would you like to have on the world?
Oh man. Um, I always wanted to join the Beatles.
Yeah, well, that's you're running out of time there.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it goes back to that morning, you know, in seventh grade when I was begging my mom to let me uh, participate in the music program, which she eventually, you know, did. Um, but to help people figure out how to love each other,
Mm.
help as many people as I can figure that out and to love themselves and to love each other, and hopefully turn the tide on what we're seeing in the world today, the hatred, the vitriol in our quote conversations. I don't even know what to call them, They're not really conversations, right?
Yeah.
But to turn the tide, uh, I know it's, you know, naive. I'm a child of the 60s, and I grew up thinking that in my lifetime we could create world peace, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I still have that dream, that hope,
Yes.
I just had my 70th birthday, so it may not happen in my lifetime, but I have faith in humanity and our potential for goodness.
Yeah.
You know, the potential is there if we're willing to tap into it, and sometimes it's painful to tap into it because it means looking at all the places where there's not goodness, right?
Yeah.
All the places of pain and the woundedness and so on. But we can heal that. I I know I've been able to heal my relationship with my former wife. We're best friends. I heal the relationships with each of my three adult kids. Um, yeah, and the friendships and so on that I enjoy today are just so rich and meaningful, fulfilling. And I want everybody to have that.
Well,
Right.
you have the right message. It's at the right time, and you've got the right tool for people to be able to access what you have to share through your app. What's the name of your app once again?
It's called the Connection Advantage.
The Connection Advantage. Everybody, download that app today if you're looking to seek out and deepen your relationships in people's lives, starting with yourself. Then Doyle is a guide for you, and his app is going to have lots of resources in there, and tools and inspiration for you to go on that journey. Doyle, real pleasure.
Oh
Uh,
man,
I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I just feel personally, I just feel more grounded than when I was 20, 30 minutes ago when we started with this.
oh, I'm glad
And
to
that's
hear
a
that.
gift that you've just given me. So thank
Oh,
you for that.
you're welcome. I'm
Yeah.
so happy to hear that. So I wish you and everybody viewing, this is what I wish in all of my correspondence and conversations. I wish you peace and joy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, that's the end of our authority interview with Doyle Banks. And make sure you go check out his app and download it and dive into the world of love. I love that. So thank you, Doyle. Good.
Thanks, Robert.
Appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, for watching.